If you are listening to this podcast, my guess is that the word normal is relative to you. On today's episode of the Midlife by Design pod, I'm talking with Debbie Harrell. She's the vibrant force behind the podcast New World Normal, which is a space where questioning and disrupting societal norms is not just encouraged, it's the main event. As the host of that podcast, Debbie dives into insightful conversations with thought leaders, exploring how we can break free from norms that no longer serve us. Sound familiar? We do that a lot around here. In her coaching practice, Debbie is a guide for values-focused humans who are ready to disrupt their personal norms. She empowers her clients to reconnect with their inner rebel and start to challenge all of their shoulds and their have-tos, enabling them to start building and living a life that has them jumping out of bed every day. Beyond her business, Debbie is a proud mom to 2 grown children and 2 rescued fur babies. Her belief in the power of community is the driving force behind her podcast and coaching, and we talk about that today. And it's also about providing comfort and connection in this batshit crazy world. So I am your host, Lori Lisai, human design teacher and midlife coach, here to help you use human design to shed others' expectations and be who you came here to be. So let's dive in with Debbie today. Welcome back to Midlife by Design. I am so excited today to have Debbie Harrell with us. And in the interest of transparency, I recorded an episode with Debbie last year and went to edit it and found that I might have mistakenly deleted it somehow. So Debbie is an amazing human, not only because of all the things that she's going to share today, but also just for her willingness to forgive and to show up a second time to record with me. So I am so grateful to you for that. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And also, you have this beautiful story of reinvention in midlife, and I'd love to hear a little about that as well.
Sure. And no problem to get to hang out with you again. As I said, I really enjoyed our first conversation, so we get to do it again. A little bit about me. I'm Debbie Harrell. I am also a podcaster. New World Normal is my podcast where we talk about questioning and disrupting norms. And I came to that work after some soul searching in midlife, like you said, midlife reboot. It happened for me mostly in 2020, which was a good timing because the world was kind of on pause.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that looked like for you?
Sure. I'm always like, okay, where do I start? Because it really was a lifelong journey, right? When you look back at it, you're like, oh, that makes so much sense. That is who I've been all along. So the catalyst was really 2017, where I had one of those years where just everything went wrong that could wrong. There was loss of 2 close family members, my own serious health conditions that was, making me very aware of my own mortality. I was also in attendance at the Route 91 shooting in Las Vegas, which is, kind of hard to deny that that's big T trauma. Yeah. And that's a little bit of my story is when that happened and I met with the PTSD specialist and he's telling me all the things I might be feeling. And I was like, yes, check. But I've been feeling those things for about 10 years now. What's up with that?
Wow.
So recognizing, though, that a lot of the things that we experience in life, our body is processing as trauma, even if we're not acknowledging it as such. And I feel like there was a fair amount of that in my backstory until late 2019, where the wheels were coming off the wagon. Like I was going through the motions, living my life, but I was on the precipice of a big fall. Like I talk about it a lot where it was a slow stumble where my feet were still under me, but, gravity was getting the best. And at any second I was getting face plant. And a friend told me, Debbie, I've taken time off work for far less than what you've got going on. And that light bulb moment of, wait, what? Take time off work? This is something we can do? The ridiculous part is I worked in HR. So I had administered several leave of absence for other people, but never given myself permission to hit that pause. And so that's when it all happened for me. I hit the pause. I spoke to my doctor. She's like, oh, yes, let's take you off work. Got off work for a little while. Started figuring out what that meant for me to do that kind of work and to give myself that focus and attention, which is really uncomfortable. And then the pandemic started. And everyone is now freaking out. Like, what the heck? And I'm like, oh, I've been there for a few months. So I was like, oh, it's not bad. It's okay. Like, it's going to be all right. And I started working with a coach and quickly got the idea that, oh, I could be an entrepreneur, because I had read some study along the line where if you're raised by employees, you're more likely to become an employee in your life. If you're raised by entrepreneurs, you're more likely to, which makes sense. That's what you see being modeled. So I got it in my head, well, I'm just going to be an employee because that's what so ridiculous. And then the idea like, oh, I could work for myself. Well, what's that going to look like? What would I want to do? Having no idea, because I feel like that's a big part for women, especially in midlife. We've spent our lives taking care of everybody else. We've never really thought about like, what is it that I want for me? I don't know. Spent some time digging around there. And then one day I was on a walk and I got this idea for a podcast. The name New World Normal came to me because we had this new normal that everyone was freaking out about. And I was like, the old normal wasn't really that great, people. And don't we have some say in what our normal is? So that's where the podcast started, and then slowly figuring out how the rest of what I want to do fits into the idea of disrupting norms. And come to find out, it all fits together perfectly.
Love it. Oh my gosh. It's such a great story from the viewpoint of a 1-3, sacral generator. I want to circle back and highlight the point that you were talking about in terms of giving yourself permission to do the things that you had been helping other people do. It's that lesson of what is right in front of you sometimes is just the easiest thing to miss. So if you're listening to this and realizing, holy shit, I know exactly what Debbie is talking about, then you're welcome. And I'm curious, how do you define normal? What is that? What does this through line look like?
For me, normal, nothing is normal because everything's normal. Right? So when I got the idea for the podcast, and I didn't start in 2020 because that takes stepping out of the comfort zone. And I wasn't quite ready yet. But I did think of the idea of wanting to normalize things that I wanted to normalize, that I wanted to see normal. But then when I started playing with the idea of normal more, I recognize that it's kind of problematic, because if you have someone that's normal, you have someone that's not normal, or a situation that's normal and a situation that's not normal. And one is usually seen as better than the other. And I just want to give everybody permission, and myself permission, to look at it as like, no, it's not better than. This is different. And so why do we have to? And then you start to recognize like how we just like to label everything and want everything to fit in these little boxes. And I'm like, but we're so unique and we're so dynamic. And like, why are we constantly trying to fit ourselves in these little constructs that don't even really matter anyways? Like, you can get in this argument about trans rights comes up in or gender comes up a lot in the news right now. And the reality, if we were so wrapped around our ideas of what it meant to be a woman or a man, it wouldn't really matter, right? Like, if we were saying like a woman should behave and act and dress and talk like this, and a man should be. And the reality is we all are a little bit of everything, So like, and it works both ways. Like, women can step up and embrace their masculine side a little bit to get shit done. And I feel like women are more comfortable in that role because they've had to. But like, men also need to have permission to reach into their more feminine side and be more comfortable nurturing and showing their emotions and not getting shit for it. I forgot, am I allowed to swear on your show?
Absolutely. Swear away.
Yeah. So like, just recognizing that a lot of the constructs are problematic and actually harmful. And then you get into the bigger picture of, why I couldn't even give myself permission to take that time off work, right? Because in a capitalist society, we see our value tied directly to how productive we're being. And then you realize just how layered and how pervasive it is in every area of our life. And then you could say, like, that sounds overwhelming, but I think it's like fun, like a puzzle to figure out, or like help people see things from different angles. And you're used to seeing it, which I think is going to be so important, especially right now in the space and history we're in. Like,
absolutely. Absolutely. And as we come into this new paradigm, this is one of the things that I love about human design is in 2027, that marks the beginning of a new paradigm. And what the prophecy of 2027 is talking about is basically this shift from the cross of planning, where we've been under these energies that have been very focused on the tribe. And tribal thinking is more about belonging, basically, and survival because we belong. And everything that you're talking about here, this whole idea of normal, is about essentially belonging so that we can survive. And when we move into the cross of the sleeping phoenix, then those tribal energies fall away. And we're going to be in a very individual type of energy, which to me is fascinating. Part of me feels very, there are fears definitely that come up around that, because I think it is going to ask us to question what our reality is, how we define normal, how we define ourselves as humans here. And I think it's such a fascinating time to be alive. And I keep just reminding myself, like, I chose this, you chose this. If you're listening, you chose this. You came here on purpose during this time. So, you're in it for a reason. So we might as well enjoy the ride. And so one of the things I wanted to come back to was this 1-3 component in your design, which the one line is this desire to do a lot of deep research and dive deeply and understand deeply what it is that you're learning. And then the other side, this 3 line, is the side that really needs to get in and kind of experiment and play around with things, see how things work. So I'm curious about how that has come to fruition for you, or what it looks like in real life. And maybe you could talk about it in terms of the way that you're understanding the kind of work that you're doing. How you mentioned earlier how the pieces are kind of starting to catalyze and come together and become more clear. And it felt to me like there's a 1-3 story in there. So I'm just curious if you could expand on that.
Well, how it came to be is all of the experimenting that makes sense, like just throwing stuff on the wall and figuring out what was going to happen, and being really curious about what we were experiencing as a collective. I don't think I was consciously like, well, you chose this, but there was definitely an element where we're here. What can I do? What are we supposed to be doing? Like, there's got to be a reason all this is happening, especially during the pandemic. It was so weird to realize that we were all, like, globally experiencing this thing. We're all obviously experiencing it differently, but it was the same thing all over the world. Just as wild to me. So what does that mean, and how am I going to show up for that? The research part cracks me up, because I've always been that person as far as, hey, I just read this online, Debbie. What's it all about? Will you look into it for me? And I used to get annoyed by it. I'm like, really? I'm not your secretary. I do not have time for this. But then I'd be like, oh, yeah, let me look. I'm on it. I'll check it out. And also recognizing when I first started building the New World Normal, the podcast, and then I knew I really wanted to have a community piece, because I feel that's so important, which I'm interested to hear more about this, like, individual of this next phase that we're going to, because I really think I can get the individual, but, like, we're all in community together. So I'm curious how that's going to work. But in bringing together a community of people, I always felt like I'm not an expert. Like, I have a lived experience, I have some training, but I'm not an expert by any means. And realizing, like, well, that's not really what I wanted to be. I don't want to be. I also feel like there's problems with this hierarchical leadership that we are so used to. And I realized I wanted to curate. I wanted to bring people together and have other people host workshops right alongside me, or I would step aside and have them. So that's what started. We'd do workshops, come together, we'd house the workshops. So I didn't have to be the expert. And I like that space.
Mm-hmm.
Because I couldn't possibly be the expert on everything that I'm interested in, because I have lots of interests. We need lots of perspectives and to hear lots of ideas, to recognize that there's not just one way to solve the problems that we're facing. So
beautiful. Spoken like a true open head and undefined ajna as well, which you also have. And to answer your question about the tribal versus the individual, I just think that it's going to look different. I like the way that you're describing coming together in community, each with your own area of expertise or genius. To me, that's what this new paradigm is really about. It is asking individuals to step forward and to be their weird, quirky, multifaceted selves in order to make a stronger collective, instead of making yourself small or minimizing something about yourself. There's a place in all of us that we've been told we're too much. So we minimize that to fit in, and that is the piece that's going to be left behind. And instead, it's going to be, you get to show up in all of your too muchness because it's actually just the right amount. And we need it. We're all here as tiny pieces of a collective consciousness. And so in order to truly fulfill and live out and make real that consciousness, we have to show up as our full individual selves. Does that make sense?
that makes a lot of sense. And it feels good. Because it's the community then is just honoring you as your humanity, you're as an individual, like who you are and how you show up.
Exactly.
And it resonates a lot because it reminds me of the island of misfit toys, which I live on an island, as you know, and we often refer to ourselves as the island of misfit toys. I think it's because we recognize each other's quirkinesses, because when you live in one square mile town, you can't avoid recognizing everybody's or having your quirkiness on display. Yes.
Right. Okay. One question I have for you is around the term existential doula. Do you still use that terminology? And if so, how does it pertain to what you do?
It is. I still have it on my private Instagram bio, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I still love the idea of it, because those are the questions I want to have, these are the conversations I want to have. Like, what the heck is going on? And what do we do to move forward? I don't really want to talk about the weather or the Kardashians, So it still speaks to who I am. But as far as like the way the business is moving, I'm more focused on the questioning and disrupting normal, which leads right to an existential conversation also. So,
right. Absolutely. Because another beautiful thing about your chart is that you have so much openness. You have 6 undefined centers in your human design: your head, your ajna, your throat, your ego, your solar plexus, and your spleen, which means you only have 3 centers that are defined. And in those centers, that's where you take on and amplify other people's energy, but you also develop wisdom around it. And you develop this ability to see it in others. With an undefined ego, for example, you can help people understand and see where their worthiness is. Where does that come from? What is the root of it? And you can point that out. I'm curious if you could speak at all to do you feel this openness in, the way that you live and or work with people? And do you feel like you've been able to build wisdom in, those areas in your life?
I feel like the openness is what led me to give myself permission to even consider coaching. part because I recognize that I can see things from lots of different angles where other people are usually a little got blinders on or a little more binary. And I'm like, no, it's that or that. And I'm like, no, it could be like this array of things, you know? And so recognizing that when I was in that process of trying to figure out how I do something with the New World Normal podcast, and coaching was an obvious path, but I wasn't comfortable with it because I didn't think I was, you know, worthy of that. And so learning more about myself and then recognizing like, oh, well, that is something that people come to me for, right? They ask me like, oh, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And recognizing that the majority of the times when I'm in a group and the group sees things this way, and I'm like, oh, wow, I would have thought it was this other way. So, and a lot of times I thought I didn't recognize it as a gift or something to be thankful for or proud of in any way. I saw it more as like, I'm weird. Why am I so weird? But now recognizing that it's actually my gift and probably part of my purpose to like help others see from other angles. That was really hard for me to say, even still, you know, like
100%. I mean, from a human design perspective, I would say your energy is definitely supporting you in doing that. And so even though it takes a certain amount of bravery to be able to step into that, it definitely is a gift. And I think with our undefined centers, that's also where we can take on a lot of conditioning. You know, it's where we are most prone to fall into acting in accordance to what other people value or what other people think you should do or that kind of thing. But that's also how we build wisdom, is when we act in those ways and then we realize that doesn't actually feel right. And that's how we build wisdom. So it sounds like you've had a really beautiful journey with that and are coming to the other side, which I think is such a gift of midlife, getting to this age where we have enough years of experience. And for you, experimenting especially, to be able to say, no, actually, this is something that I'm really good at. And I think your point about what people consistently come to you for and noticing that, being aware of that, is so important. I think a lot of people don't have an awareness around that. You know, they may constantly be asked the same sorts of questions and still not really be aware that, oh, is it a gift I have? You know, this is an energy that I have that people are tuning into. And so maybe I should focus on it a little bit more or see how I can use it to help other people. One of the other questions I had for you is about storytelling. And I'm not sure how much this resonates or not, but you have gate 35 in your undefined throat. And gate 35 it's this energy to like collect emotional experiences and then be able to share them with others in order to help them to transform. So you've mentioned these big T traumas that have been part of your life. And I'm curious how much you feel you've been able to translate those and use them to help other people.
not necessarily super consciously or concisely. Like I feel like I recognize there's value in me sharing my stories, but I'm still trying to figure out like how to share them in a way that people can receive them and I feel comfortable delivering them. And also that they'll be helpful, because I recognize that the reason that I ignored a lot of my traumas for so long is because to me, they were just normal life. Like I was comparing them to headlines and like all these catastrophes and dramatic things that are happening in other people's lives. And I was like, well, mine's not that bad. Like, who am I to like take up that space and say like, look what happened to me. And that's where I feel like my story is best in serving people, because I feel like that's common. I feel like a lot of people will go through life and not acknowledge that what they're experiencing is traumatic and needs a little bit of their attention to like work through it. Or maybe they might need support working through it. And so, yeah, I recognize that I want to share stories because I love hearing other people's stories and hearing myself in their stories. And I know how cathartic and helpful that is for me. So of course I want to figure out a way to share what I've experienced so that other people might be like, oh yeah, that I do that too. And maybe I should think a little bit more about that.
Well, as you're talking, I feel like you are expressing your undefined throat so beautifully, because the power of an undefined throat is to take on and amplify other people's throat energy. And you, as a sacral generator, maybe it's just about your response. When you said you love hearing other people's stories, maybe it's about the questions that you ask, and being open and available to then amplify what other people are saying. And through that process, you're also seeing yourself in what's being shared.
That makes sense. And it's funny that you say the amplifying other people's voice, because that keeps coming up for me. I'm on TikTok and I love TikTok. I love the way people are able to share on there. And I always thought like, oh, I'm going to do that, like twist the button and just share an impactful story, and I just haven't gotten there yet. And I realized the other night, it's like, it's okay. I like all these other people are saying it so eloquently and so concisely. Like, why shouldn't I just amplify their voice? Why do I have to be the one to say it? So that is just a conversation I was having with myself the other day. And that's kind of the same thing with the podcast, right? I'm having people on and amplifying their stories. And that is serving me as well as my audience. So
100%. Absolutely. I mean, Oprah Winfrey has an undefined throat, and I feel like she is such a great example of the power of an undefined throat. Being able to see where there's a story and share it, ask those questions that will help people feel comfortable enough to share exactly what's on their hearts. And for you to have that gate 35 energy in play, I think is a beautiful invitation. That's even, I want to peek here again at your chart to see if it's conscious. So, you may find yourself realizing that people are sharing these deep stories with you when you ask what seemed like a very simple question to you. And then all of a sudden they're going deep, which is a really beautiful possibility, I think, for you. Yeah.
Well, like,
does that happen? Has that happened before?
I feel like it's happened in my personal life. I don't know that I've had any moments like that on the podcast, but definitely people feel comfortable going deep with me. I don't know if it's because I say all the time, like, I don't want to talk about the Kardashians or the weather, like,
right. Yeah.
So yeah, I recognize that people do tend to go deep with me. So just good.
Love it. Love it. Okay. I had one more question for you, which I've been asking my podcast guests, which is, how do you feel like you are being who you came here to be in midlife?
How do I feel that I am?
Yeah. How do you feel like you are kind of honoring your energy? How are you being the person that you came here to be on this earth in this lifetime as you've hit midlife?
I think it started with that permission piece of doing things differently. And then, and I've been on that quest ever since, just tuning in, realigning, starting over, if it doesn't feel right. And I don't want to say it doesn't feel right, because like not everything feels good. But recognizing that I have core values, like I am somebody, I have ideas of what I want the world to be like, and making sure that I'm checking in with myself regularly, that the things I'm doing on a daily basis are supporting those ideas. That's how it shows up for me. And then recognizing when you look back on the life and figure out like where I am right now, right? Talking about disrupting norms and being a rebel life coach, and then recognizing like, oh gosh, I've kind of always been that person, but not to like the degree that I am now, but getting to recognize, honor, and encourage that side of me is kind of fun.
Love it. Okay. Tell us, what do you have cooking? So you mentioned the podcast. What else do you do? Where can people find you?
I have the podcast that, as you know, I just recently relaunched. And so I'm getting that dialed in, always having new ideas of how to structure the episodes. So those are evolving and getting ready to launch a group coaching program. The one thing about my coaching, I always, since I had such a positive experience with it, I think everybody should be able to experience it. So it's really important to me to keep my services accessible. But of course I have to charge because I have to make money. So I'm doing group containers so that I can, invite people in for less investment. So I'm really excited to get that going again. And then we do have a free community as an offshoot of the podcast where we get together regularly for book club or workshops or pop-up challenges, just a way to connect with each other and, stay tuned into an online community in addition to our in real life communities that I think are going to be very important over the next few years. And then I also have a membership level for if you want to have more live, regular meetings with the group to keep you on track. It's called Aligned AF. It's all about that. Tuning in, making sure the things you're doing every day are taking you in the direction you're actually trying to go and not taking you someplace else entirely.
I love that. Providing that structure. I just put out my yearly planner and I structure it the same way. It's just like having things right in front of me to remind me, what are your values? Are you actually living them on the day-to-day? Because I think especially as entrepreneurs, I don't know if you have a lot of entrepreneurs in your community, but I think it's really easy to have like this task list, right, of a million things to do. And then you realize by the end of the week or the month that you've spent all this time doing those tasks, but they're not either in alignment with what you actually want to be doing with your life and or getting you any further in your business, right? So that is beautiful. I love that. And I will drop the links in the show notes so people can find you.
I'm New World Normal most places, and I actually just got the domain newworldnormal.com. So,
yay! That's exciting. Yeah.
It wasn't available for the longest time, and then one day it became available when I happened to be moving my website. So I was like, oh, why not?
Look at that. It was just waiting for you. Well, thank you so much, Debbie, for spending time with me today again. It was so nice to reconnect.
Well, I appreciate the information on my human design. Very fascinating.
I so appreciate you listening to Midlife by Design, and I hope that this episode gave you some things to think about in regards to redefining normal and embracing your messy humanity. As you know, we are hosting the Wild Women by Design retreat, and I would like to personally invite you, gorgeous soul, listening to this podcast to join this incredible group of wild women we have gathering. We leave in late March 29th to the April 3rd is the time that we'll be spending in Costa Rica. And we are already getting to know each other online. So if you are interested, check the notes, the show notes, and click the links to find out more information. And if you're interested in working with Debbie, listening to her pod, you can check the show notes for those links as well. And until next time, as you know, I am always sending you strength to release what no longer serves you, joy to fill your days, and clarity to fully be who you came here to be.